You know, life has a strange way of teaching us lessons, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, and sometimes through the words we speak without even realizing what they reveal about us. I've met people from all walks of life, some wise, some lost, some growing, and some stuck in the same loop because of the beliefs they hold on to like a broken compass. And often, the clearest signs of someone holding themselves back are hidden in the things they say every day. Today, I want to talk about 5 things a foolish man repeats, often without even noticing. Not to judge, but to awaken. Because once you recognize these patterns in others or in yourself, you can break them and rise above them. Let's begin. There is a sentence people speak without realizing it carries the weight of chains. A small sentence, a simple sentence, yet one that can bind a life, silence growth, and turn a destiny into a prison. It's not my fault. These 4 words become a shield, a hiding place, a refuge for the ego, but never for the soul, because the soul knows the truth. The soul never grows where blame becomes the soil. We live in a world filled with stories of people pointing outward, never inward. It's the easy road, the familiar road. When something breaks, when a mistake unfolds, when a plan collapses, we look for someone else to carry the blame because admitting our part feels like standing bare in the storm. Yet it is only the man who dares to face the storm who discovers the strength to walk through it. I once knew someone who walked through life like a traveler carrying nothing but an empty bag. At least that's what he believed. Every setback he faced, every failure he encountered, he tossed into that empty bag and said, "I didn't put it there." He blamed his parents, he blamed his friends, he blamed circumstance, fate, timing, everything except the one person who could transform that bag into something of value, himself. He moved from place to place, job to job, relationship to relationship, convinced he was cursed by the people around him. But curses don't cling to a man clings to them. He never realized he had chained himself with his own words. Blame feels safe because responsibility feels heavy. But what if the weight we fear is the very weight that strengthens us? What if the burden we run from is actually the tool that shapes us? When you say, "It's not my fault," you surrender the power to change. You hand your life over to whatever you believe is responsible, your job, your past, your family, your failures. You give away the steering wheel and then wonder why the road seems unfamiliar. The truth is, the most dangerous time in a person's life is when they believe they are always innocent, because innocence without honesty becomes self-deception. No growth can enter that kind of soil. No wisdom can take root. A seed cannot flourish in ground that refuses to admit the presence of stones. There was a young man who lost opportunity after opportunity. He said the world was unfair. He said his boss didn't appreciate him. He said his friends were jealous. And every time someone tried to guide him or reflect truth back to him, he would harden like stone. "It's not my fault," he'd repeat, as if the words protected him, but protection is different from imprisonment. He thought he was covering himself, but he was constructing a wall around his life, brick by brick, excuse by excuse. One day, he met someone who spoke differently. This person said to him, "Listen to the pattern of your life. Every room you enter has conflict, and in every conflict you insist you played no part. But rooms don't follow you. People don't follow you. Problems don't travel like shadows. If they appear everywhere you go, maybe they're not around you. Maybe they're within you." For the first time, the young man had no words. Silence opened a door where excuses could not. That day he looked into the mirror, not to defend himself, but to understand himself. And that single act, the act of looking honestly, became the first real step of his transformation. When a person takes responsibility, even for what is not entirely theirs, something shifts. Responsibility is not a punishment, it is permission. Permission to grow, permission to change, permission to rewrite what has been written. The moment you say, maybe I played a part, you reclaim authorship of your life. You step out of the role of a victim and into the role of a creator. Life is filled with storms we do not choose, but how we respond, that is ours. When you accept responsibility, you are not saying you caused every storm. You are saying you choose not to be powerless in the midst of it. You are saying you are willing to learn, willing to change, willing to rise above the winds that once pushed you. The man who always says, it's not my fault, lives at the mercy of the world. But the man who says, let me see my part, becomes the master of his path. Because the world can stop you, people can fail you, circumstances can betray you, but none of these have the power to imprison you unless you let them. Growth begins the moment excuses end, and power begins the moment responsibility begins. There is a kind of blindness that does not touch the eyes but the soul, a blindness that disguises itself as confidence, as certainty, as pride. It speaks through a man with a quiet arrogance, and its voice is a simple phrase, I already know everything. These words sound harmless, even strong, but hidden within them is a wall, high enough to block wisdom, thick enough to silence guidance, and solid enough to keep a man trapped inside his own limitations without ever realizing he is imprisoned. When a man believes he already knows everything, he stops listening, he stops learning, he stops seeing the world for what it is, and begins seeing only the reflection of his own ego. And when your world becomes smaller than your pride, your growth becomes smaller than your fear. Because deep down, the man who says he knows everything is not proclaiming his wisdom. He is hiding his insecurity. He is terrified that if he listens, he might discover how much he lacks. So he clings to the illusion of certainty, like a child gripping a fading light. I once crossed paths with a young man who carried this illusion like a shield. He was intelligent, gifted with natural talent, sharp-minded, quick-witted, but every time someone tried to teach him, guide him, or show him a better way, he would respond with the same calm, dismissive words, I know, even when he didn't, especially when he didn't. He walked through life with the confidence of someone who had never been tested, and the arrogance of someone who feared being humbled. His father tried to teach him responsibility, I know. His teachers tried to correct him, I know. His friends tried to warn him, I know. Life itself tried to break through his wall, but he kept repeating the same sentence as if it were a sacred truth. I know, but the truth is knowledge that cannot be questioned is not knowledge. It is pride. And pride is a silent thief. It steals opportunities while whispering, you don't need them. It steals wisdom while convincing you that you already have it. It steals growth while making you believe growth is unnecessary. Pride is the assassin of potential. One day, that young man lost a position he desperately wanted. When he demanded to know why, the one giving the decision looked at him and said, because you cannot learn, and a man who cannot learn cannot lead. Those words stunned him. They struck not at his mind, but at the illusion he had carefully built around himself. For the first time, he felt the weight of not knowing. He realized that every I know had been a brick in the wall that kept him from rising higher. Every dismissal of advice had been a closed door. Every moment of pride had been a moment of loss. Loss he didn't recognize because he was blinded by the belief that learning was beneath him. There is a profound truth in life. The wisest people are not those who know the most, but those who admit how much more there is to know. The moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop seeing the world's depth, its mysteries, its lessons. It is the moment you stop seeing yourself clearly. A man who says, I already know everything may feel powerful, but his power is hollow. It is like a tree that appears tall but has shallow roots. When the storm comes, and storms always come, that tree falls first, because its strength was never real. It was pride disguised as stability. History is filled with those who thought they knew it all and fell, not because the world was against them, but because they had no room left inside themselves for wisdom to enter. A cup that is full cannot receive water. A mind that is full of self cannot receive truth. And yet, when a man finally says, "I don't know," something miraculous happens. The world opens to him. Doors that were once invisible become visible. Voices that once sounded like criticism become guidance. The lessons of life, once muted by pride, become clear. The humble man learns from everyone, friends, enemies, strangers, even from failure itself. He becomes a student of life, and because he is willing to learn, life becomes willing to teach him. The greatest transformations come not to those who claim to have all the answers, but to those who open their hands and say, "Teach me," for to learn is to grow, and to grow is to rise, and to rise is to become more than you were yesterday. And the man who is willing to become more will always surpass the man who believes he already is enough. There's a phrase people use as if it were nothing more than a shrug, a shield, a casual dismissal tossed into the air. But hidden inside those three words is an entire world of fear, pain, and walls, built high enough to keep love, wisdom, and growth far away. I don't care. A simple sentence, spoken easily, yet it carries the quiet tragedy of someone who has closed the door to his own heart without even realizing it. Because the truth is, most people who say they don't care are the ones who care the most. They're just afraid to let anyone see it. A man will speak those words when life touches a wound he never healed. When someone comes close enough to see the scars he has tried to hide. When responsibility calls for more than he's willing to give. I don't care becomes his armor, as if apathy could protect him from disappointment, rejection, or failure. But apathy is not protection. It is a slow, silent fading of the soul. There was once a man who loved a woman deeply. She gave him her time, her laughter, her warmth. She asked him what he felt, and he answered with a cold breath, "I don't care." He said it as if her presence meant nothing, as if losing her would not shake the ground beneath him. But inside, his heart trembled. He cared more than he could bear to admit. And when she finally turned away, believing his words, he watched her leave with a wound deeper than the one he was trying to hide. Years later, he confessed that "I don't care" had been a lie, one that cost him the very thing he cared about most. The tragedy of those words is not in what they say, but in what they silence. When a man claims he doesn't care, he is really saying he is tired of being hurt. He is tired of trying. He is tired of giving parts of himself to a world that sometimes gives nothing back. But healing does not come from closing the heart. It comes from letting truth breathe inside it. And the truth is, caring is not weakness. Caring is courage in its purest form. Apathy, on the other hand, is fear in disguise. It is easier to pretend that nothing matters than to face the risk that something might. Responsibility demands effort. Love demands vulnerability. Dreams demand sacrifice. And so the man who says, "I don't care," is not choosing strength. He is choosing escape. He is stepping back from the very things that could build him, refine him, awaken him. There was a young woman who worked tirelessly to help her brother rise out of the shadows of his life. She encouraged him, guided him, stood by him through every storm. But each time she reached out, he'd shrug her off and say, "I don't care." He pretended nothing touched him, nothing moved him. But when she fell ill and could no longer hold him up, he broke down. He realized that "I don't care" had been the wall that kept him from receiving the love he desperately needed. When she recovered, he told her the truth, that he had cared all along but didn't know how to show it. And that truth became the beginning of his transformation. Sometimes "I don't care" is spoken by someone who feels unseen, who believes that his effort won't matter, that his voice won't be heard, that his heart won't be valued. Rather than face the pain of insignificance, He convinces himself nothing matters. But the world does not change for the man who feels nothing. The world changes for the man who feels deeply and still steps forward. Life has a way of testing the walls we build. It brings moments where indifference becomes impossible, where something or someone pulls at the heart so deeply that the shield cracks. And in that moment, when the truth breaks through, the man begins to understand that caring is not a burden, it is a gift that gives meaning to struggle, purpose to work, beauty to sacrifice. The strongest people are not the ones who say they don't care. They are the ones who dare to care even when it hurts. They are the ones who open their hearts despite scars, who offer kindness despite betrayal, who fight for what matters even when the world tells them it's easier to let go. When a man stops saying, "I don't care," he steps out of the shadows of his own fear and into the light of who he was meant to be. For caring is not the weakness of a fragile heart, it is the power of a courageous one. There are words that sound harmless when spoken, words that seem small, simple, and ordinary. Yet within them lies the power to build a wall taller than mountains, stronger than steel, and more limiting than any prison cell. Words that can chain a destiny before it ever has the chance to unfold. One of those sentences, the one spoken by those who have forgotten the vastness of what life can be, is this: "That's impossible." It slips from the tongue so easily, as if the speaker has reached the end of every road, climbed every mountain, measured every horizon. And yet, more often than not, those who declare what's impossible have never taken a single step toward discovering what truly is. "That's impossible" is not a statement of truth. It is a reflection of the boundaries within a person's own mind. It is not the world speaking, it is fear speaking. It is discouragement speaking. It is every disappointment, every failure, every insecurity rising up and pretending to be fact. There was a man I once knew who spent his youth dreaming of creating something meaningful. He wanted to build a small business, something that would not only support his family, but lift others out of struggle as well. But every time he mentioned his dream, the people around him responded with the same cold sentence: "That's impossible." They told him the economy was bad. They told him competition was fierce. They told him he didn't have the connections, the education, the resources. And slowly, he let those voices become his own. He folded his dream like a fragile piece of paper and placed it on a shelf inside his heart. And there it stayed, gathering dust, losing shape, fading with the years. He grew older. His responsibilities grew heavier. His self-belief grew weaker. But the dream remained like a quiet echo, calling out to him in moments when he least expected it. Early mornings, late nights, moments when life was silent enough for him to hear what he had long buried. But each time the echo called, he answered it with the same words that had been given to him: "It's impossible." And so the dream never saw the light. Years later, he met another man, someone from the same background, the same hardships, the same lack of resources. But this second man did not look at the world through the lens of limitation. He looked at it through the lens of possibility. He too was told his idea wouldn't work. He too was discouraged by those who claimed to know better. But instead of burying his dream, he nurtured it. He faced failure, not as a tombstone, but as a teacher. He worked through the nights when no one noticed. He tried when others quit. And in time, he built a small store. Just a humble place at first, but one built on vision instead of fear. Years passed, and that little store expanded. It became a cornerstone of the community, giving jobs, offering hope, proving that what people once called impossible was simply unattempted. When the first man learned of his journey, he realized the truth. The difference between impossible and possible had never been circumstance. It had been belief. One mind opened, one mind closed, one heart willing, one heart afraid. Impossible is not a ceiling placed over us by the world. It is a ceiling we place over ourselves. Think of how many people throughout history were told their dreams were impossible. Every innovation, every breakthrough, every great change began with someone who refused to accept the limits handed to them. The first time humans thought of flying, it was called impossible. The first time someone imagined communicating across oceans in a moment, it was impossible. The first time someone believed illness could be cured, impossible. Imagine if every visionary, every dreamer, every resilient soul had listened to those words. The world you stand in now would be a far smaller place. Even in everyday life, the word impossible becomes a weapon against one's own potential. People use it to avoid trying, to escape responsibility, to hide from the discomfort of effort. A young man will say it's impossible to change his habits, but the truth is he fears discipline. A woman will say it's impossible to heal from heartbreak, but the truth is she fears vulnerability. A student will say it's impossible to succeed, but the truth is he fears failure more than he wants victory. Impossible becomes the protective cloak people wear to avoid confronting the deeper truth. They are capable of far more than they allow themselves to believe. There was a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to survive. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and often felt like she was drowning beneath the weight of life. She dreamed of returning to school, earning a degree, creating a better future for her children, but every voice around her told her she was dreaming too big. It was impossible, they said, because she had no time, no support, no money. Even she almost believed it, until one night, looking into the tired eyes of her children, she realized that the word impossible didn't protect her, it suffocated her. She took one step, then another. She enrolled in evening classes. She studied when the world was asleep. She stumbled, failed exams, cried on the floor, got up again. Years later, she walked across a stage, diploma in hand, and as she looked into the audience and saw her children beaming with pride, she whispered, "This is what they called impossible." And in that moment, she understood. The only power impossible ever had was the power she once gave it. The truth is, what people call impossible often reveals more about their perception than about reality. The impossible is simply the unfamiliar, the untried, the uncomfortable. It is the territory beyond fear. And the moment a person takes their first step into that territory, the impossible begins to lose its shape, its weight, its authority. Every great story of transformation begins the same way, with someone refusing to be confined by the belief that something cannot be done. The walls of impossibility crumble not with certainty, but with the courage to attempt. When a man stops saying that's impossible, he begins to see the world as it truly is, not as a cage, but as a field of open doors. Some doors require patience, some require pain, some require perseverance, but they exist and they open for the one who believes the journey is worth taking. Every time you challenge the impossible, you expand the borders of your life. You stretch your potential. You awaken your strength. You discover parts of yourself you never knew existed. The impossible is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. It is the place where the ordinary ends and the extraordinary begins. And the extraordinary has always belonged to those brave enough to walk where others refuse to step. There are words people speak not as a confession, but as a shield. Words that sound honest on the surface, yet carry the weight of surrender, the heaviness of resignation, the quiet tragedy of a life confined by its own belief. Among all the sentences that hold a person back, few are as binding, as limiting, as quietly destructive as the phrase, "That's just who I am." It seems simple, even humble, yet inside these words lies a chain that locks the past to the present and the present to a future that looks no different than yesterday. People speak these words when they feel cornered, when confronted by the need to grow, when truth exposes a flaw they have avoided for years. It is easier, far easier, to lean on identity as an excuse than to admit the possibility of change. "That's just who I am," becomes the refuge of a man who fears transformation, who fears the work it requires, who fears the unfamiliar path on the other side of responsibility. It becomes the shield of someone terrified that if he lets go of this used up version of himself, he will have nothing left to hold on to. I once knew a man who was quick to anger. He would snap at those closest to him, his wife, his children, his friends. He knew his temper caused pain, but when confronted, he would shrug and say, "That's just who I am," as if anger were woven into his bones, cemented in his blood, written into his destiny. But anger is not destiny. Anger is a path chosen again and again until it becomes familiar enough to feel like identity. He didn't realize that every time he said those words, he wasn't describing himself, he was imprisoning himself. He wasn't explaining his behavior, he was excusing it. And excuses are the thieves of transformation. There was another man who avoided responsibility. Every time a task required effort, every time life asked him to rise a little higher, every time someone asked him to step into courage, he would reply, "I'm not that type of person. That's just who I am." But underneath his resignation was fear. Fear that he might fail, fear that he might not be good enough, fear that if he tried and didn't succeed, he would lose the illusion of adequacy he protected so carefully. So instead of failing, he chose to never try. Instead of discovering who he could become, he clung to a version of himself he no longer even admired. People do not speak these words because they are content. They speak them because they are afraid. A woman once told me she couldn't trust anyone because of how deeply she had been hurt in the past. She said, "I don't open my heart. That's just who I am." But her words trembled as she spoke them because somewhere inside she knew the truth. That wasn't who she was. It was who she became after the wound. But when a wound becomes an identity, healing becomes impossible. Identity is powerful. It shapes choices, behaviors, beliefs. But the tragedy is when a temporary season becomes a permanent definition. A childhood scar becomes a lifelong label. A betrayal becomes a worldview. A mistake becomes a character trait. And a moment of weakness becomes a lifetime sentence. Identity should be a journey, not a prison. And yet, countless people imprison themselves with this single phrase. They repeat it until they believe it, until the possibility of change feels like a foreign land, until growth feels like betrayal, until they begin defending the very chains that hold them down. There was a young woman who struggled with self-worth. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone unworthy of love. She told herself she was shy, reserved, invisible. "That's just who I am," she whispered, but it wasn't who she was. It was who she became after years of hearing voices that told her she wasn't enough. And because she believed them, she lived out a story that wasn't written for her. She walked through life assuming invisibility was her nature, when in truth it was her wound. There was a man who believed he would never rise above poverty, never break free from the patterns he inherited. Not because the world told him he couldn't, but because he convinced himself that greatness was for others. "People like me don't change," he would say. "It's just who I am." And so he lived small, not because he lacked potential, but because he chained his potential to an identity that wasn't even his own creation. People cling to "that's just who I am" because change demands courage, and courage demands humility. It asks a person to admit that who they have been is not who they must remain. It asks them to face the truth that growth comes from letting go of what no longer serves them. It asks them to break a cycle that feels safe even when it's painful. But the most powerful truths in life are simple. You are not the sum of your mistakes. You are not the echo of your fears. You are not confined to the limitations someone else put upon you. And you are not destined to remain who you were yesterday. Identity is not a fixed shape. It is clay waiting for your hands. There is a quiet strength in admitting that you can become more. A strength greater than pride, greater than stubbornness, greater than excuses. To say, I can change, is one of the most powerful declarations a human being can make. It tears down walls, it opens doors, it awakens the dormant places inside the soul. It reveals a truth most people never dare face, that they were born with the ability to evolve. Imagine how many futures have been lost because of the words, "That's just who I am." How many relationships crumbled because one heart refused to soften? How many dreams died because someone believed they were incapable? How many talents remained buried because someone misunderstood their scars as identity? And imagine how many lives could be transformed if those same people whispered instead, maybe I can grow, maybe I can become more, maybe I am not finished yet. Every great transformation begins with the courage to question the identity you've inherited, crafted, or accepted. It begins with recognizing that the person you've been up to this moment is not the limit. It is the beginning. A man is not defined by the anger he learned to use as protection. A woman is not defined by the fear she developed as a shield. A child grown into an adult is not defined by the voices that shaped him in years he cannot return to. And no one is defined by the worst moments of their past. The phrase, "That's just who I am," is not a truth. It is a surrender. It is the closing of a door that was meant to remain open. It is the acceptance of a life far smaller than the one waiting just beyond courage. But the heart was not created to remain unchanged. The mind was not designed to remain unchallenged. And the soul was not meant to remain unmoved. You are allowed to release an identity that no longer serves you. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself you once needed to survive. You are allowed to become someone different, someone wiser, stronger, gentler, braver. Transformation does not betray who you are. Transformation reveals who you were always meant to be. And the moment a person replaces "that's just who I am" with "this is who I choose to become," the chains loosen, the boundaries widen, and the path of their life begins to shift, quietly at first, then unmistakably, like dawn breaking after a long night. If you've heard these sentences from others, you'll understand why their lives never shift. But if you've heard them from yourself, this is your wake-up call. You don't have to remain who you were yesterday. You don't have to repeat the mistakes you grew up seeing. You don't have to carry the limitations someone else planted in your mind. You can rise, just as a flame rises, even from darkness. A wise man doesn't start wise, he starts aware. Brave enough to face his flaws, strong enough to break his patterns, and humble enough to learn, unlearn, and rebuild. The choice is yours, always has been, always will be.